And it is a Republic News break. Sukesh Chandrashekhar has now written a letter to the media where he says that it is wrong to call himself a con man or a thug, and he calls himself a lobbyist. I want to bring in my colleague Niranjan, who has exclusive access to that letter, where Niranjan, it is a letter put out to the media, and he says that it is wrong to call him all these terms at this point because he's not convicted yet. He's also claimed that he will contest the 2024 elections and says that he was in a relationship with Jacqueline. He gave her those gifts, and all his Bollywood friends are being targeted now to get to him.
Well, it's a pretty explosive letter, Suesha, and let me now show you the letter, which is on the screen here on the Surface device. I'm going to read out. It's a pretty explosive letter. It's a handwritten note, by the way. He's written this letter from inside the jail, and he's released it perhaps through his lawyers and the media. I have the full letter, so bear with me. I'm going to take you through the different points. It's very, very explosive. He goes on to make a lot of claims. So the disclaimer before we show you the details: he's a con man, he's in jail, can't be trusted, and these are his claims. Prima facie claims. He claims he's releasing this press note, and he talks about how a lot of wrong stories have been planted, etc., and goes on to talk about the different versions of the investigating agencies. So he's targeting the agencies as well in this particular case. But let's go through the letter. Let me go through the letter. This is the letter that he's written. And in the letter, he starts off by talking about the charge sheet. The content of the charge sheet. He says it's disturbing to see and how things have been projected. And it's a Republic TV exclusive. Only Republic TV has this letter. We're putting out some of the details of it. You must have seen the pictures of him giving gifts to actors, etc. Republic TV has the full letter. He says many things have been projected, and he wants to put a few points out in the public domain. And this is where it starts. Point number one, he says, I've been called a con man, a thug, etc. Cases I'm facing, I've been convicted. It could have been certain I was involved, but I'm not convicted yet. And then here he says, I have been facing political or business disputes. Many influential individuals are involved. He says many influential individuals are involved, and that he has been taken a hit. He claims he's a fall guy. He says, I have taken a hit as a fall guy. I have been acquitted from many cases. He goes on to put up a case for himself. He's a con man, remember that. So he's obviously trying to sort of put up an innocent face. He says, I have been a corporate liaison. He claims he's a corporate lobbyist. He's right now in jail, and even in jail, he was getting undue benefits. He was living like a VVIP con man. And he says, I was a corporate lobbyist who has worked with multiple corporate houses nationally, internationally. He claims openly that he was a bridge between business houses and governments of different states. He has not taken names, but he claims he was a middleman between government and different states. He says he's been involved in this corporate lobbying business since the age of 20, and he's been very close to political parties. I'm going to try and highlight some of the pointers here. So just bear with me. He says that he's been mediating for business houses and governments of different states, and that there are multiple political parties that he's close to, top businessmen and families. And he says now there is a dispute between one business family, and for which he's facing the brunt. He goes on to talk about how he has made several hundred crores. He says in this handwritten note, allegedly written by him, he says, I have made a few hundred crores every year as commissions. He says he makes a few hundred crores every year as commissions in this particular note. And this is a letter accessed by Ananya, our reporter, who's also there live from Delhi. So I'll go across to him to get full details. I just wanted to read this out and then go across to him. He says, every year I make a few hundred crores as commissions through corporate lobbying, as mentioned. So I'm highlighting the words, few hundred crores every year as commissions, corporate lobbying. Sorry about that. And he says, I have no need to con or cheat people, etc. You can't take him at face value. Of course, he's a con man, remember that. And he says, talking about the 200 crore extortion case, and he puts that in quotes. He says, I have known the Singh brothers for the last 10 years, and I have mediated many of the business disputes related to Ranbaxy and mainly in South India. Now, after long, I was again in touch with them, etc. He goes on to talk about the details, and in this particular case, he goes on to talk about the families that were involved, etc. And this is the letter. Let me just, zoom into that. And he goes on to the details of that particular case, and the different calls that the call details are emerged. And he's sort of trying to dispute the call, so I won't get into that because it's part of the charge sheet as well. Now, going further, and this is the third page of the note, I guess, because it's mentioned here that it's page number 3. He says, Makoka was registered against him. Another wild claim. He says Makoka was registered against him because he did not contest 2024 Lok Sabha elections. He claims that Makoka was registered against him because, he didn't contest the 2024 Lok Sabha elections. And his proximity with a few political leaders was one of the reasons. He says there's no other reason. He has no syndicate or gang, has never been involved in, any dangerous crime, etc. And then he goes on to talk about how it's an attempt to intimidate him. And then he makes a mention of how he will contest the elections once again. He says, I will still fight elections. He says, I will still fight elections and be victorious in 2024. At the same time, will prove how Makoka is imposed against me as sheer abuse of power. And then he goes on to talk about his wife. He claims his wife was targeted, and that was to make him weak, etc., to break him down. And then he goes on to talk about, he makes a very, very explosive claim. He claims he was pressurized and extorted. He claims he was pressurized and extorted by the DG prisons. And he puts a number to it. He says he was extorted 12.5 crore. And he had he had to, pay up that money. And he had been scammed. I'm sorry, it just zoomed out. So I'm just zooming in once again. So he says multiple tranches, he made multiple tranches in payments. Now you can't take him at face value. These are wild claims, right? Con man in jail, letter allegedly written by him, and he makes wild claims about extortion. And he claims paying up in different tranches in different locations. And then he goes on to talk about, he says, I told agencies, but nobody took any action. And here's the interesting mention. He says he was in a relationship with Jacqueline. Jacqueline was summoned by the Enforcement Directorate on several occasions. He says, admits here that he was in a relationship with Jacqueline Fernandez. And that was the reason he had given her gifts. He says, I was in a relationship with Jacqueline, and that was the reason I had given her gifts of any kind of transactions that took place, but it is my personal life, and none of the amounts were any proceeds of the court, and the court will decide if it was or not. She has nothing to do with the case. So he's trying to make a case for Jacqueline, saying that Jacqueline has absolutely nothing to do with this particular case. And he speaks for his friends in Bollywood. He says, my friends in Bollywood are being targeted just to defame me and make me look in a bad light in society, so that I won't be able to do any business related to films. He claims his friends in Bollywood have been targeted, and he ends this letter by saying that he's approaching different courts, etc., and then he calls the case politically motivated, etc., etc. So it's a long letter written by him because he's sort of been exposed completely by the agencies in the charge sheet, and he's trying to make a case for himself. Let me go across to Ananya. Ananya, he's spoken about the different details. Can you take him at face value? You obviously can't, because he's a known con man, as it's established in the charge sheet as well.
First, Niranjan, I'll put this letter in perspective for you. This letter comes at a time when the ED charge sheet that was filed by the Enforcement Directorate, a massive blowing charge sheet that was filed by the Enforcement Directorate, a cognizance was taken on that charge sheet. And in January, when the courts reopen, the court would be taking up this case and it would proceed further. So the timing of this letter comes really close to when the case is going to be heard. Secondly, what he's mentioned cannot be taken definitely at face value because he's a con man. He's made such vague statements before also, because remember, this is not the first case against him. He was also involved in the 2 leaves bribery case with regards to the AIADMK when the AIADMK had gone into 2 factions. But now, what this letter completely says, the biggest allegation that he makes is that he was pressurized by DG Tihar, Sandeep Goyal, to pay him 12.50 crores as an extortion. First, Secondly, he says that he was in a relationship with Jacqueline Fernandez and she has nothing to do with this case. Secondly, he says his friends in Bollywood are being targeted. And also, he goes on to say, Niranjan, that he is not a con man but a corporate lobbyist, and he is acting as a link between businesses and government agencies. In fact, he goes on to say that clearly that he doesn't need to in fact con or cheat anyone because he's already made hundreds of crores by corporate lobbying. So these claims being made by him cannot be trusted at face value. However, the timing of this letter is not surprising because the case is coming up before the court as soon as the vacations, the winter break of the courts ends, and a trial would begin because the court would also be proceeding to frame charges against him, not only in the Makoka case, not only in the case that is being probed by the economic offences wing of the Delhi police, but also that has been filed by the enforcement directorate with regards to the lobbying and laundering of funds. In fact, if you remember, Niranjan, we had broke down the details of that explosive charge sheet first on Republic TV, wherein it was clearly mentioned that Sukesh Chandrashekhar had given really expensive gifts, which include a BMW 5 Series car, not only to Jacqueline Fernandez, but also to Nora Fatehi and other people. In fact, it was also mentioned by the Enforcement Directorate in its charge sheet that in order to keep people happy, not only the Bollywood stars, but also jail officials, in order to live a lavish life inside jail. Remember, the 32 officials have been transferred and suspended with regards to this. He used to give expensive gifts to people so that they used to shut their mouths in order to give him a lavish life and a great experience inside the jail premises. Niranjan.
Right, so Ananya, they're getting us details of that letter which Niranjan had also read out for us on the surface. And to break down details, as Niranjan tells us, that Sukesh Chandrashekhar calls himself a corporate lobbyist as opposed to the terms that the media is putting out for him, calling him a con man or a thug. And this is an open letter to the media. Ananya also puts out details of how this is very carefully timed because Sukesh Chandrashekhar is aware of how the matter will now be heard in the court. And while in that letter, he has mentioned that he did make a few hundred crores through commissions in corporate lobbying. And he has mentioned some big companies. He's also said that he was in a relationship with Jacqueline. He did give her gifts, and he says his Bollywood friends are being targeted. Swapnil Kothari is with me on the phone line. Swapnil, what would you call this? Very smartly building a case ahead of when the matter is to be heard in the court. The image he's trying to paint of himself and trying to reverse that in the public eye at least. Your opinion, Swapnil?
Yeah, I mean, these things happen day in, day out, especially when people are, facing the wrath of the law. And when the matter is about to be heard before the courts, obviously the person knows where he or she is standing, and try to some sort of betterment of the images, sort of a tactic used by the accused in question. Now, to say to the media and to write to the media a letter saying that don't call me a con man and all of those things because I'm a very rich man even otherwise, and I don't need to do all of those things which you'll have mentioned, but the reason why you all are calling me a con man is just a very, very feeble exercise. Ultimately, the court is not going to go by what the media has branded him to be or, what he writes in his letter. They're going to go by the evidence at hand. And if the evidence suggests that he's a con man, then, he's going to face the sections that are there before him that have been leveled on him. And the court is going to find him one way or the other, depending upon the sections and the charges that are proven eventually by the prosecution in that sense. Only in that sense, then the court will look at it. Other than that, all of these things are a mere public relations exercise, which more often than not, you've seen in the past before with a lot of other cases, which I don't need to go into mentioning all of them because there are quite a few. So those things often fall apart and do not really hold much water, and they turn out to be more so counterproductive than anything else. The best thing that any person in his situation would do is to just keep his mouth shut and do not, comment one way or the other or write anything to the media. That would be the best thing to do. That would be my suggestion as a lawyer to anybody, who would ask me my opinion. Since the matter is there in the court, let your lawyers fight it out in the court, not off the court. All of these exercises are generally an exercise in futility. And to tell the media that please don't call me this or don't call me that amounts to telling the media not to exercise its right to freedom of expression. And the media always uses the word allegedly. And the conman is something which one uses, especially when one is faced with the sort of evidence that is there before. I mean, you ask a person on the street or a vegetable vendor and you say that, this is what has happened with, one individual who seems to have, who seems to be some sort of a person who's an attraction for a lot of actresses, etc. So the vegetable vendor is also going to say, oh, looks like a conman to me. So that doesn't mean that he turns out to be a conman just because a vegetable vendor says him to be that way. But, so
Absolutely,
all of these
Swapnil, and let's understand that he understands how to grab attention and trying to correct that image in the public eye or probably ahead of his hearing in the court. But like you're saying that this is a mere tactic which may not really work and just may grab eyeballs for a day or so. Thank you, Swapnil, for speaking to us.